Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Tanya Stern, Acting Planning Director with the Montgomery County Planning Department, and just wanted to open up this presentation and to welcome you all to our Wheaton headquarters, and thank you for joining us for this great presentation that we are looking forward to hearing from the ULI Washington Technical Advisory Panel on our University Boulevard Corridor Plan. Just wanted to say a thank you in advance to the panel for their great work over the last day and a half. One thing I mentioned to them yesterday is that I'm also a ULI member and have served on these technical advisory panels in a couple of instances in this region, and as well as having been a sponsor. And so I understand the value of these panels and having this opportunity to have experts provide their professional expertise and kind of an objective look at the questions and issues that the sponsor organizations present. So we're really excited to hear their recommendations, which will result in a report later on that will be available to the public. And with that, I will turn it over to Deb Billick.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so delighted to be here. Thank you for joining us. What I thought I'd do is just set the stage for what we're about to hear and listen to over the next little while. So we are the Urban Land Institute, and we are Urban Land Institute, the Washington office, which means that we run and direct programs in the land use and real estate space for members and non-members alike in the metropolitan Washington region. That includes DC and suburban Maryland, Virginia. So let me share with you just a little more about us. Can we take it to the next slide? Broadly, here's how the TAP process works. As a member organization, we work to engage members on thought leadership and advancing the most thoughtful and best use of land that we can throughout the region. And we do that through a variety of programs here within the ULI Washington space. One of those programs is this Technical Assistance Panel program. And so for the past 2 days, at the leadership of my colleague, Emily McKnight, who's right over here and deserves deep recognition for pulling this together in concert with the county, we've been sitting together to listen, to learn, to really understand, and to make the best recommendations we can to you so that you can advance what it is you're hoping to advance. What I'd like to acknowledge is the panelists sitting before you at the dais. Everybody give each other a wave. I'm told that this should be informal, even though the setup feels a little formal. Everybody up here is a thought leader in their field. I'm certain you'll introduce yourselves when you speak. I hope you will. But they have volunteered their time to be with us for the past 2 days. So the beauty here is that you're getting talent and leadership and thinking for the sake of the thinking itself, not for the sake of any sort of political reason or anything like that. So we really do strive to give you market-driven recommendations to the challenges that the county has confronted us with. And so our hope is to work in partnership with you to deliver the best that we possibly can. Next slide. So these are the questions that are to be answered. Robert, I'm going to ask you, would you like me to go through these, or would you? Okay, so what I'll say is our panel has been co-chaired by both Robert Atkinson and Connie Fan. I also want to acknowledge these co-chairs stepped into this role at the very last minute because the chair who we had recruited to serve in the leadership role actually fell ill. And so in this moment, we're constantly being agile, but I do want to acknowledge you and say thank you very much for stepping in and, providing just the stick-to-itiveness and the rolling up your sleeves and we can do this feeling that I know this program really thrives on. So we worked with the county to refine and scope questions. The county came to us with these questions that they wanted us to answer. You can read them for yourself, but the idea basically is, how do we think about this corridor in a way that makes the most sense for this moment? So what market conditions are necessary? What's the economic feasibility of existing housing and institutional uses? What are other economic feasible recommendations that we might be thinking about? And are there other things that we should be thinking about too? Are there any planning or development options outside of what's been proposed that we aren't considering? Which is one of my favorite questions, right? It always makes us think about what aren't we thinking about that we should? And that's where really the creativity lies. And so with that, I'm really very happy to ask the panel, whoever's next, which I believe is Robert, to join me up here, or maybe you're going to present from there and share with us what it is we want to know. So thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So rather than waste a lot of your time going through and telling you how wonderful we all are, let me just say that this is a group of people with very high horsepower and a lot of experience in commercial and public sector and private sector development. And when the final report comes out, there'll be bios for each one of us. So next slide, please. All right, so the first thing we did was we met with a number of stakeholder groups yesterday. And some of the things that we heard, a lot of it had to do with safety along University Boulevard. You know, we know that there have been a number of unfortunate pedestrian fatalities, and that's something that we've kind of focused on as we went forward and started developing recommendations. One of the things we heard, although this is a bit controversial, is the bike lanes generally worked well, but there were some issues, process issues, in how they got implemented. Four corners is dangerous, and it's not really working for anybody. There are concerns if new housing types get introduced in the neighborhood that could lead to gentrification. Some other folks, though, thought that having more housing in the county directed at middle-income folks, which actually a lot of the neighborhoods along University Boulevard are what's a lot of jurisdictions are talking about is trying to get to have attainable housing or housing for the middle class. And then the next thing is you need adequate bus facilities, and then that are well lit and with safe crosswalks. Next. All right, so what we heard part two, preventing fatalities. We've already talked about that, but that's the number one priority. Second. All right, so the overarching themes of what we heard from the folks that we chatted with yesterday, and then our own analysis, is that beautifying adjacent areas with street trees lighting and attractive BRT stations is important. And it's not just to make everything look pretty. This is really a lot, has totally related to the second bit, which is making everything safer. You know, as more people start using bus and bike, you know, and other alternatives to get to and from work or school or, you know, church or wherever they're going, having a better environment for those activities is really, really important. Secondly, or last thing is accommodating growth while substantially enhancing residents' ability to access, enjoy neighborhood amenities is also a real driving consideration in this area. Next. Okay, so we're going to go into the recommendations right now, and they're kind of three areas. And our group kind of self-selected into teams. So each team is going to be presenting to this. As Deb said, we weren't really expecting anything quite this formal in terms of how we're going to be presenting. So our intent is to, even though we're up here on the lectern that are on a dais, that we kind of keep things kind of conversational. A couple of other things that we really want to emphasize so early is the level of staff support we got and the participation of the folks who were in the stakeholder sessions. All of that, this could not have happened without that. So we're very, very, very appreciative of the efforts that everybody involved in this has put in. And I basically want to talk or congratulate Emily and Elizabeth with ULI Washington providing invaluable support as we move forward on this. A couple of housekeeping items. First off, a lot of things in this presentation are part and parcel of the same things, are part and parcel of the whole. So if you would, let's hold questions until we get to the end so you can see how all these different bits relate to each other. Second thing is turn off your damn cell phones, please. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to our transportation team.
Hey, Will,
Okay.
as you dive in, perhaps it would be helpful to take just a minute and describe the length of the road that we're talking about so that people who don't have any context have a geographic frame of reference as we're making these recommendations.
Yeah, so the corridor that we're referencing here that we're looking into is University Boulevard, essentially from Wheaton to the Beltway. So from just east of Wheaton, technically, at Amherst, do you remember the miles? 2.5 miles. Through Four Corners, and it technically ends just south of the Beltway, although there's not much that happens once you pass Blair between there and the end of the study corridor. Okay. Go to the next slide. Okay, so first slide, just a few things that we reviewed going through this. There's many different items that go into looking at a corridor between safety, vehicular operations, pedestrian, bike. We reviewed crash data, the Vision Zero action plan for the county, the Thrive 2050 plan and how it relates to corridor development and what that means for changing transportation facilities to not only accommodate vehicles, but also pedestrian and bikes as a priority. We looked at the pedestrian, the bicycle, and the vehicle master plans, the levels of service along the corridors for each of those various pieces today, and what needs to happen to reach the goals of each individual plan. Also importantly were the stakeholder meetings where we got some actual input on how the residents feel about what's going on in the neighborhood. Some reactions, as was mentioned by Robert, to the SHA pilot program that put bike lanes between Amherst and the high school, and how that played out. And now that they're gone, it sounds like some people want them back. So we looked into all of that. So essentially, University Boulevard does not meet many of the safety standards that have been outlined in the county guidelines for pedestrian, bicycle, and ADA along almost the full length of the corridor. There are some small sections as you go through Four Corners where you start to get a little bit of buffering between sidewalks and roadways, and some things are somewhat adequate, but there are no bicycle facilities currently along the full length of the corridor. In most places, sidewalks are essentially at the edge of the roadway with no buffers provided, 6 lanes, high-speed traffic. This corridor has been on the county's top 10 list, if you will, for state roads on the high injury network for at least the last 5 or 6 years. It was number 1 for several years. It's currently at number 4 with over 17 serious and fatal collisions with at least 3 pedestrian fatalities along the section that we looked at. There are also 2 major county high schools along the corridor that front University Boulevard, as well as several other schools that are embedded back in the neighborhoods. Several parks that are located directly along the boulevard. We heard stakeholder concerns about connections between the parks, connections out in front of the high schools, preventing kids from walking across University Boulevard where they're not at traffic signals with a crosswalk was a big concern. I think we heard from stakeholders at both high schools. We looked at the vehicular volumes and the levels of service along University Boulevard, which show generally that levels of service are adequate according to standards and actually pretty good in many cases, which would indicate that the 6 lanes out there today may be providing a little more capacity than is actually needed to facilitate vehicular traffic, which could open up the door to some of our recommendations for improvements in the future. So as part of that, we developed both interim and then ultimate condition improvements along the boulevard, along sort of the full stretch, if you will, and we can get into those in just a minute. So as I noted previously, SHA did implement their pilot program, which for those of you that saw it, it reduced 1 travel lane in each direction to provide bike lanes. And as I think Robert mentioned, some of the concerns that we heard about that were in its implementation, but generally the feedback we received was everybody liked it and they were not happy that it went away. Protected intersections will be a key part of implementing pedestrian and bicycle improvements along the corridor as well. Also, one additional item to note is what we viewed is there are a lot of single-family detached parcels running along the corridor with a curb cut to each. So some consideration should be given in the future to trying to consolidate or implementing policies that would promote consolidating those curb cuts to reduce openings along the future facilities. You go to the next slide. Okay, so on this slide here, we have a map that shows some of the parks in the area, and we have some connections drawn on here. So one of the takeaways that we found was between the Wheaton CBD and sort of the trail network along Sligo Creek, which connects up to the Wheaton Regional Park and several of the other parks, there really is no safe bike route, if you will, to get from Wheaton to that corridor. And the same thing if you're going from the east to west to and from Four Corners. So with improvements along University Boulevard, that opens up a connection to get out of the CBDs and Four Corners, to get to that trail network and enjoy, that rich amenity that this area has. Along with that, we have some blue lines on here, if you can see them. Those are the locations of Blair and Norwood, and that's where we've expressed not only adding safer pedestrian crossings, but also some sort of deterrent to keep people from walking across mid-block and crossing the median where there is not a safe crossing. Similar feature with the purple line, on the purple arrows on the map here at Sligo Creek. With that sort of critical north-south trail connection that runs through the entire corridor all the way into DC, all the way down to the Anacostia waterfront, there really should be a safer crossing there to sort of have that be a more continuous experience along that trail network. Go on to the next slide. So with that, it looks like we'll run over here on the bottom here, but so here's our short-term recommendation. Our thought process here was to come up with something that could be done somewhat similar to the SHA pilot program that could be done within the existing road section. So this does not require moving any of the curbs that are out there today. The actual construction would be very minimal, maybe some stuff at intersections to provide additional protection. But along the majority of the corridor, it would involve restriping, some resurfacing, installation of buffers, as you see here, and some flex posts. So what this gains is a protected bike lane that runs along the sidewalk, which not only provides a place for bikes, but even when bikes aren't in that bike lane, it will always provide a buffer between people on the sidewalks and the cars in the roadway. So working with the limited space that we have, we go down to two road lanes, if you will. One of those would be for buses in a mixed lane. We recognize that there is a considerable volume of traffic on the road. One lane would likely not be enough to support that. So there will need to be two general purpose lanes, but one could be a mixed BRT bus lane to support that future plan. The center median would stay roughly the same as it is. As I said, with some locations would receive some modifications at intersections to provide some better pedestrian sort of zones in the middle, if you will, some better, for ADA access and those types of things. And with that, I will hand it off to Jonathan for the next one.
Thank you. So just a little bit of framing as we transition from interim improvements to long-term improvements. So bring back in the Vision Zero concerns and the fatalities and injuries along the corridor. There are clearly immediate needs that must be addressed in the short term, and we think there's a lot of options there where you layer these short-term improvements to yield some significant benefits. There's a limit to that approach, and you should definitely take it and maximize interim improvements because long-term capital projects are complicated, they're long, they have to fight for competitive funding, but ultimately that is what's going to be sort of be able to be the higher impact and bring a lot of the safety benefits as well as some of the ancillary placemaking and development benefits that other parts of our team will talk about in just a minute here. So let's talk about that long term. This corridor is within the county's BRT network. There are, I think it's 10 corridors, and there are 4 that are moving forward through design and beyond. Unfortunately, University Boulevard is not on that list of projects that are actively moving forward, but they are still projects of interest. And I think what that does is it brings an opportunity to relook at some of the now about 10-year-old planning documents and specific recommendations for design, and really bring sort of the best state-of-the-practice designs and approaches to meet today and tomorrow's needs for the corridor. The 2013 master plan for BRT recommends a single transit lane in the median. In talking with stakeholders and looking at the actual conditions on the ground, and and the need for really developing and delivering high-impact bus service, we are recommending a different approach. It's the approach that you see on the screen, where there are one bus priority lane in each direction, converting a general purpose lane from each direction into that bus lane, as well as installing some really important pedestrian scale and placemaking amenities. The specific dimensions on the screen don't pay too much attention to. There'll be a whole design process. I think what we're trying to communicate is what are the important elements to prioritize in a cross-section. And in a lot of ways, a cross-section is sort of like a budget, right? It represents your values and your priorities. And so I think what we would like to underscore here is, yes, traffic is important to move, but I think we also saw that over-planning for traffic is what has resulted in the Vision Zero concerns and deaths and injuries along the corridor. So what we're proposing is a more balanced approach, one that prioritizes buses, and one that also prioritizes placemaking and beautification, as well as, and not last but certainly not least, pedestrian and bicycle facilities along both sides of the street. It's a wide street, and when you're at a pedestrian scale, I think we all experience this every day. If you're walking around, that little bit of extra effort, to cross the street so I can get to the nicer pedestrian facility, you're probably not going to do that. We heard that from our stakeholders at Northwood High School. There are pedestrian facilities that people can go to, but it's a little bit out of the way, so they're not used. People go where they want. And so we want to provide adequate and generous sidewalks, or a shared use path on the side that could serve both pedestrians and bicyclists. So we think that's a really important component. So this is, I think, something that works along the general extent of the corridor. Where things get really complicated and where some really hard decisions are going to need to be made is towards the eastern edge at Four Corners. And if we could switch to the next slide. Actually, before we do that, the cross-section that we're talking about is very similar to a BRT project that is moving forward in Montgomery County, which is Veers Mill. Here's the concept layout for that. And I think what we're proposing is something very much in line with planning efforts and projects that are moving forward. Next slide. Okay, so Four Corners. Four Corners, if you've been out there, and I think we all have, it's a tough nut to crack. And so this is going to be an area that definitely needs a deeper dive. But again, we're trying to elevate some of the objectives and planning principles and priorities for decision makers to work with and hopefully advance as planning and design would move forward. So the great thing about moving from a 6-lane cross-section, as you have today, to a 4-lane cross-section is it really is much more space efficient, and it opens up a lot of opportunities to redistribute and reconfigure the road network in Four Corners. Today, University Boulevard splits with a separate eastbound and westbound roadway. Again, that road diet from 6 lanes to 4 provides an opportunity to maybe consolidate and have sort of one continuous movement for general purpose traffic. And that gives you the opportunity to have a different prioritization and uses on the eastern leg, which could be transitioned to more of a bus and pedestrian and bicyclist facility, perhaps with some local access. And providing sort of a bike and ped and transit first route through a very congested area. That's where you're going to really see the benefits, particularly on BRT. Dedicated lanes is great for buses, but where it's really impactful and really needed is where there's congestion, and that's this area. So by prioritizing buses through this area, also bikes and peds, you're going to really elevate the experience and the service for those users that are traveling by modes other than car, which is a broader objective of the county. So that's the broader vision. We did hear from some stakeholders about existing concerns about cut-through traffic through the neighborhood. So along with sort of a reconfigured network that might have some impacts to to vehicle level of service. Along with that could come some cut-through prevention or mitigation in the existing neighborhoods through diverters and other strategies. So that is all we have on the transportation side, and we'll switch over to our next topic.
Okay, hi, I'm Tracy, and I'm going to talk through, I'm going to get us started talking through some of our development recommendations, but I'm going to be joined by my friends and colleagues over here to walk you through what we saw on the corridor in terms of development potential. Next slide, please. Okay, so, starting from an overall mandate that there's a need to increase housing supply in the county, we arrive at the general recommendation that we should incentivize infill development along University Boulevard. And we have identified a few policy changes that we think could facilitate that. And now we're going to talk you through our thinking about what's feasible on the corridor and how we arrived at these specific policy changes. Next slide. Okay. So thinking about the bigger picture context here, the County Housing Needs Assessment forecasts 60K new households in the next 20 years. 20 years is also kind of the horizon that we're thinking about while we're looking at University Boulevard for this project. Also understanding that University Boulevard is one of many designated growth corridors in the county's new long-range comprehensive plan, Thrive 2050. The particular context for University Boulevard, however, is that we are talking about a special place within the county that sits at a sweet spot in terms of its relative affordability, in terms of housing costs, but it's also its relatively high accessibility to retail and other amenities like Metro and Sligo Creek. Compared to the other designated growth corridors in the county. So there's a bigger picture question that the county and that staff, residents, et cetera, are going to need to answer in order to come up with a modern plan for this corridor. You have to answer this question of what does growth mean on a corridor segment that's largely built out with existing development. And so what infill development's even feasible? And if this corridor is going to accommodate new growth, what about its character as a sweet spot? Is there any way to preserve that in a context of growth? So that's what was on our minds as we went out on the corridor to take a look at what the opportunities might be. Next slide. So first I'd like to elaborate a little bit on we heard about the sweet spot from stakeholders, but I think it's also something that is clearly demonstrated in the data. So what I'll draw your attention to on this slide is the second column of the table, which shows square feet of retail per capita. And these are somewhat arbitrary what I'm showing here is 5 of the designated growth corridors in Thrive 2050. There are more than that, but these are 5 that cover kind of a range of different submarkets within the county. So I picked a single point near the middle of each of these designated growth corridors and then just looked at what was in a 2-mile radius. So the first row is our study area here on University Boulevard. And if you look at that second column, you'll see relatively high square feet per capita of retail relative to the fourth row on the column, which is in the far eastern edge of the county. So good access to retail amenities comparable to other really desirable corridors like Kensington, higher retail per capita than the county as a whole. But then I'll also draw your attention to the final column on this table, which is current multifamily asking rents per square foot. And what we see is that on this corridor, housing is relatively much more affordable than it is on other corridors in the county. So that's what we see in the data to characterize this corridor as a sweet spot. Next slide. This is a 2-mile radius around that address. So it's all of the buildings that are within a 2-mile radius of that point. Correct, of all of the buildings within a 2-mile radius at that point. This is just like a back of the envelope kind of way of thinking about. I would definitely recommend doing a more comprehensive market study before creating any policies. But in a 12-hour tap sprint, this is the back of the envelope that you get. Next slide, please. Okay, so, the first thing to think about in terms of development opportunities is, are there any, parcels that are vacant or ripe for redevelopment that are on the corridor? So as I previously mentioned, to be honest with you, this corridor is super built out. And, the first thing that really struck all of us while we were driving the corridor is that there are extremely limited opportunities for development. That said, we did identify some parcels, and so I'm going to hand it over to my friends and colleagues here to talk about some of the parcels we saw where we did think there was some opportunity.
Hi, I'm John Coe, and together with Alan and Chris here, we kind of, as we were going through the bus tour, we decided, yesterday, we kind of assembled, basically, I think we have 7, 8 parcels here that we looked at that were potential redevelopment parcels. We have the large WTOP site, which is up at the north end of, near Amherst and University Boulevard. Then we went down to the Kemp Mill Shopping Center area there. We saw some unit potential there. We also, backing up, we looked right near downtown Wheaton, the project that's in process right now, a 90-unit project next to the synagogue, Har Zion. We also looked at another site next to Sligo Creek, which is the Northwood Presbyterian site, which has significant land available for development. We then went further down and looked at the Collins Funeral Home site for 86 units. And across from that is a small site for townhouse development. And then we further went down to the Safeway site, which has some redevelopment potential as well, if Safeway were consider to do a joint venture with a residential developer potentially. So in aggregate, and this again is using a back-of-the-envelope methodology for numbers of units on the land, we came up with a total of a potential of 1,400 units in redevelopment potential on the site. Next slide, unless somebody has a comment.
Well, I would,
Go ahead.
yeah, excuse me. Hi, I'm Chris Callett. I would just make one comment that these numbers reflect aggressive, high-end outside envelopes of number of units, and that would conform with a real appetite to find and develop units along this corridor. So take these numbers and scale them back and down based on your, conversations, desires, appetite for number of units and density.
Right, and also emphasizing the truly built-out nature of the corridor. None of these sites is available for development in the sense that they all have a current active land use. And so this is about, this would involve truly thinking really big, both in terms of the individual landowners' potential aspirations, but also what the county could potentially do in order to incentivize a change in land use, given that there is something currently on every parcel.
Great comment. And emphasize the word yield scenarios. This is just kind of math. Potentially, we could yield this many units. Not telling you you should do this many units.
And of course, we're not talking about the infrastructure investment here that's going to need it for both a public sector standpoint as well as the investigation that a private developer would have to investigate this.
Are you trying to say that you would ask these places to close effectively to make these houses?
So I think the synagogue development is a great example of how we're thinking about feasibility in the context of developments on sites that have existing land uses, which is that the existing land use is accommodated as part of the redevelopment. And, so for example, we're not proposing that it would be a really good idea to close the Four Corners Safeway. It would be a terrible idea to do that. But that a new land use could accommodate both the previous land use and some additional growth.
I would add the word co-location to the conversation. There are examples throughout the region, including here in the county, of co-locating religious institutions with housing, whether they be adjacent or vertical. Same with shopping centers, doing infill like we're seeing behind Cabin John is a proven concept. And then amusingly, in Arlington, there actually is an example of a housing development wrapped around a funeral home. So anything is possible if you get creative and you're anxiously looking for land
There's
opportunities.
one right across the street.
Yeah, it's a much denser project, but there is the Safeway, just on the other side of the street here. So, but also, again, let me ask that we hold questions until the Q&A section at the end of the project or end of the presentation. So we've got a lot of material to cover, so we'd like to do that as efficiently as we can. Thank you.
And move to the next slide.
Okay, so obviously, in addition to the housing needs assessment, the county also has a missing middle study, and there's some interest in understanding a little bit more about the potential of missing middle and the feasibility of missing middle. This corridor is already a great example of what missing middle housing looks like and what it can do. The existing corridor contains a very diverse mix of housing types. There are detached single-family homes, there are attached townhomes, there are multifamily apartment buildings, all of various sizes. So, I think this is a really helpful corridor in terms of helping people imagine the typology of missing middle. We need look no further than our own study area. What really characterizes the study area is that the vast majority of the housing stock in the area is aging. 74% of the housing units in the study area were constructed before 1970. That means that stock is now more than 50 years old, and that is a tipping point for the life cycle of a building in terms of the structure is going to need investment in terms of either remodeling it or tearing down and replacing it with something else. And we noted one example that we're showing here on the slide of that already happening within the study area. We anticipate, just based on these inventory conditions and based on strong market demand for housing in the corridor, great parks, great schools, great county, close to the metro, that much of this housing stock is going to be remodeled or replaced over the next 20 years. And so the question is, with what? And so here's one example of. Great. Okay, so here's an example of a new $1.3 million detached single-family home in the study area. And the question is, are there going to be more homes like this, or is there, which is great, are there other possibilities that might be feasible? Next slide. Okay, so we looked at the full inventory of R60 and R90 parcels in the study area. These are relatively small lots. So that really limits the potential in terms of missing middle capacity, because the parcels are really small, and if you wanted to put a bigger building on one of them, you might need to get more than one parcel. But parcel assembly in built-out detached single-family areas is very rare, right? Like, people might sell these houses and move once every 20 or 30 years. So it's not a simple matter to build a contiguous parcel assembly, even two parcels next to each other. And realistically, if you're talking about $500,000 to acquire a single parcel, nobody is going to do that so that they can build a duplex. So realistically, we think that for this particular corridor, and this is probably likely the case on many of the growth corridors in Montgomery County, there's going to be a need to think really big about policy solutions to facilitate parcel assembly if you want to unlock the possibility of missing middle. We made a little hypothetical scenario here to think through, is it worth pursuing that investigation? What is the yield potential of missing middle? So once again, looking at the outside of what might be hypothetically possible, if we look at those almost 2,000 single-family parcels in the study area, and we thought, okay, maybe you can squeeze maybe a quadplex onto this size parcel. And if you think, okay, over a 20-year planning horizon, most people aren't going to sell or move, some will. So perhaps at the outside, 20% of parcels can be converted, although I think that is a really aggressive number. It is probably much less. But if you work from 20% and you look at all the single-family parcels in the study area, it could add about 1,500 new homes to the study area, which would be an 80% increase in the number of households currently accommodated by the R60 and R90 zoned land. So it's hypothetically, extremely hypothetically, comparable to the development capacity of the multifamily infill development scenarios that we explored. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. So me and my good friend Margaret is going to talk about placemaking along the corridor area. We're both designers, and Margaret used to work for the public sector. I'm a private practitioner specializing in urban design. And we understand the numbers and as well as the transportation experts had, provided some real solid recommendation in terms of what are the potentials here. But we also understand this is a corridor that has rich history, and people traverse back and forth, going to work, coming home. This is people's community. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Margaret to talk about placemaking as the corridor goes through this sort of transformation process.
Thank you, Connie. Is it? Now it's working. Okay, thank you, Connie. Could you advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. So Connie and I have several recommendations to make about placemaking, and as has been discussed and led up to by our previous speakers, the big idea that we're looking at is how do you incentivize and make things to happen that are desirable for the community and for the corridor. And the most important is to transform the University Boulevard corridor into a place of choice where people want to live. So there's a market for somebody to come in and make the investment to create some additional housing in the places where there's opportunities. And these corridor improvements could also increase the quality of life for everybody in the corridor, in the adjacent neighborhoods, and have a beneficial impact on their home values as well. So we're recommending that you create a placemaking concept for the corridor that celebrates its history and addresses improving connections, such as though for wayfinding and for people to orient themselves and get to all of these wonderful destinations that are nearby, such as the new library, the Sligo Creek Trail, the Northwest Branch Trail, the high schools. And we encourage action in the near term, which was addressed also by our friends here who talked to you about transportation. Do not wait for the BRT to make some of these changes. There's a tendency to want to wait and fold things into an upcoming big capital project, saying, please don't wait. There are many things that can be done now to make this a more attractive corridor. And definitely engage the community every step of the way. Because what we heard in our discussions with community members was that there have been gaps in which decisions are made or projects move forward, surely unintended, but they have created friction. And we're saying so every single step of the way, make sure the community is involved, whether it's the planning department or you're advocating with many of your sister agencies to make sure that they do this. On a very simple level, we're saying add street trees and street lights to the whole corridor that are attractive and enforce the fit with a placemaking concept. We are also recommending that you choreograph the inclusion of public art on the corridor. That could be done today. And we'll come to a slide on that. We also know that you've been working on studies as how to energize parks. We think that's great work, and that that sort of methodology should be applied right here in the corridor to evaluate whether or not the existing parks have what they need in them. That can be acted upon quickly. And finally, maximize the connectivity between open space resources, which is lacking in this area, as it was mentioned earlier about the trails. Next slide, please. Okay, we talk about a placemaking concept. Many of you are very familiar with wayfinding and placemaking. We urge you to focus on creating a very well thought out and creative concept that celebrates the history, although it's not in your face. This is not an area filled with many colonial buildings. There's a history here, and as you know, the WTOP building is part of that history. And we're saying also fold into that a wayfinding system, which is a comprehensive and unified directional sign system that will tremendously benefit people, especially on foot or bike, and customize it to the area. You see here examples from Martinsburg, which seemed to be a comfortable comparison, and also some examples that are local, that are from College Park, and then the standard state wayfinding sign for Sligo Creek Trail, which was recently installed and very exciting to see. Next slide. And we talk about choreographing the inclusion of public art on the corridor. You'll see circles that indicate opportunities. Those are just the BRT stops. Those are not even all the stops. We understand there are already opportunities. We know that there's a very well-used public bus stop in front of Northwood High School, which is very popular with the students who decide that they want to take the bus instead of walking. And then we have a string of parks that are highly visible to the corridor, which you see represented by the hollow circles. The artists' examples are probably familiar to you. I'm sure you're familiar with Linda De Palma's work, which is in Brookside Gardens, which is a wonderful inspiration for what could be incorporated, and also Charles Bergen's work, who has done a lot of work locally as well, to get a feel for that. At this point, next slide, please. I would like to turn this over to Connie.
Thanks, Margaret. So we have a couple of illustrations here. Just try to envision what this corridor will feel like from a pedestrian safety standpoint. And this image is a quick illustration of in the interim, before the whole corridor is transformed with the BRT and everything else, what can we do that would improve safety within the corridor? So with that extra buffer between the pedestrian or shared pedestrian/bike way, there will be a bit more separation between a drive-by car and the residents in the area. Not only that, with the corridor slowly transform into higher density or more units within the corridor, you can have a sense of that scale. What does it feel like if you're going to try to walk down this transformed corridor with a building closer to you? And this is just the artist's illustration of what future could be. The next slide, please. And we also looked at Will's recommendation for the short term, right? For the short term, what can we do? Can we improve the median, incorporate some of the physical deterrent to minimize unsafe mid-block crossing, which is a big problem right now? And with the two-lane traffic, how can you implement that? And how do you sort of articulate the message as SHA, MCDOT figure out how to narrow it down from a three-lane through traffic down to a one lane, and in the process introduce some of the streetscape improvement to help provide safety and safe crossing. Next one, please. And we heard a lot about students, high school students along this corridor, how much they love to cross over the boulevard. In the current situation, I could imagine my younger days, I would love to dash in front of a bus before the bus catches me. But as responsible citizens here, what can we do what's the right word? To dissuade that kind of behavior so that we have less casualty along the corridor. So we took one intersection here. It's a Northwood High School, which, as some of you know, in a couple years, the high school will go through an expansion, demolition expansion program, and our very capable transportation experts here has studied this little intersection and recommend maybe it's time to look at relocating that bus shelter across the street, because students tend to do that mid-cross block, try to catch a bus that's coming down the corridor. So this is a quick snippet of what that cross will be, and the school site plan does indicate the desire to channel students towards this intersection, and with proper transportation programming here, you can regulate the behavior a lot better. In the meantime, you can see the Beewood Park across the street. It could take on some improvement as well to improve this crossing between the Sligo Trail and southbound of the Boulevard. This is just a quick snippet of what could be. Okay, next slide, please. Before we go with the closing, want to again re-emphasize, with any kind of project and study, we need to keep it open-minded. This is a long process. Engage the public is extremely important. And we understand how the last experiment with bike lane didn't quite go as well as it could be. And we understand some of the changes we, as a panel, recommended here are quite transformative. It will transform people's lives. And we would encourage the county keep an open dialogue with the community, and not only that, within the county and state highway system, make sure the information is properly and timely published out there so that the residents know every step of the way. If it's an interim project, if it's a pilot project, information is out there to minimize miscommunication and misunderstanding, which is part of human nature, but the more we can improve that, the better a society, a happier society. And with that, Robert, I'm going to close the panel.
I would just add, too, that I know that Montgomery County is dedicated to public engagement. And all we're saying is that you know, make sure that continues throughout the process, but we're confident that's going to be the case. And then in terms of this specific presentation, what I understand is that the this has been recorded. It's going to be up on the county's website. And then once the final report gets published, then that'll be publicly available as well. So with that, I want to thank all of you. We all want to thank all of you for sitting here so patiently, because I know you're going to have questions. So knock yourselves out.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Allison Marcus. I live in Campbell. It's the neighborhood that was most negatively affected by the Bike Lane project because they took. Sorry. Hi, I'm Allison Marcus. I live in Kent Mill. I'm in the neighborhood that was most negatively affected by the Bike Lane project because they took away our right turn from Arcola Avenue onto University Boulevard. And we had a lot of major issues getting into and out of our neighborhood. The only close exit out of our neighborhood to get anywhere else, literally anywhere else, is Arcola University. All other exits out of the neighborhood are over a mile away from housing. So like my particular house is near that corner. If I go to any other exit from the neighborhood, it takes me at least 15 minutes to get back to that point of Arcola University. So it's very important to us that we have safe and easy exit out of our neighborhood. I also, and the bike lanes were absolutely horrific for that. I actually had trouble getting into and off of my street because of the bike lane project. The other thing to consider is that a lot of us get our bicycles stolen when we leave them outside. So a lot of people don't actually own bicycles anywhere near this corridor because anytime the bike is not fully secure within our actual residence, under lock and key, it is at risk of being stolen. Our cars also get broken into regularly. It's part of just the general theft in the area, and that it affects the entire boulevard. The other thing, I did an analysis. I actually studied the traffic accidents during the during the bike lane project versus that, or for part of the bike lane project from June 14th, 2021 through November 11th, 2021, and compared that to the data in 2019 prior to the pandemic when it was typical traffic patterns, when there was a lot more cars on the road. And I found there was actually more accidents during the bike lane project. In the part of University Boulevard where there were accidents and more serious accidents, where more pedestrians were hit than what happened prior to when the bike lanes happened. So there were some major issues. I sent that analysis back on November 17th to people in Montgomery County Planning Board, different people in Maryland State Delegation, and our county council members at the time. I did a lot of work on that because I was curious and I had seen a number of accidents in that boulevard, including an overturned vehicle. And I think that's what, like in the median, and that's what finally prompted me to do it. I'm a math person, I'm an actuary, so it's part of what I do. So I'm very concerned. Also, I do want to mention that 1117 Arcola was actually a part of land from 1119 Arcola, and as of about a month and a half ago, the county online still hadn't partitioned off that property in the tax records. So it really is a really separate property. And it was actually built having in mind to be a dormitory. There's 8 bedrooms and very little common space. It was built being a dormitory in mind for the boys' yeshiva high school. So, and Kent Mill is really is a very heavily Orthodox area where we walk everywhere, at least one day a week. During holidays, we have 2 or 3 days in a row where we walk everywhere. And our kosher infrastructure is in Kent Mill Shopping Center. So my concern is if you're really trying to push for like infill there, we need housing in Kent Mill. But if you're trying to push for infill there, then our kosher infrastructure goes away for a period of years, and that really, really strongly hurts our community. We can't just go to Giant and buy our food, or Safeway, right, or get everything at Costco. We need Shalom, we need Ben Yehuda, we need Kosher Pastry Oven, and we need Holy Chow. And so it's
I think those are great points. We only looked at the surface parking and the vacant office building that's at the bottom of the site.
Not the center,
Yeah.
not the center.
okay, because
Yeah.
that was
Yeah, completely understand. The center is,
The center is off
it's-
limits, yeah.
well, it's just
and you also
being
mentioned
used.
building on top
Yeah,
of,
I mean-
Yeah.
of houses of worship also. So like it's not like Shomrei can relocate.
It would be a co-development and would be thought through to address all those
But we're also
issues.
concerned with cars coming in and out of the shopping center as well, because Shomrei Amuna is right there, and we have so many people walking to and from. Like 500 people use that space on Saturday mornings at the same time, all walking to the space. So it's a heavily utilized pedestrian area, and increasing that kind of traffic. Like half the shopping center's closed on Saturday, so there's a lot less traffic there. If you add all that housing, the concern is that that's a lot more vehicles on the road, and that could be really harmful and really dangerous for pedestrians because it's, like I said, heavily pedestrian.
Can I just jump in really briefly? Again, Tanya Stern from the Planning Department. I think for the panel, they're interested in any particular questions, but the feedback that you just shared is very valuable for us as we continue to work on the University Boulevard Corridor Plan. So just wanted to make note that, again, this is recorded. We're also hearing the feedback that you all are sharing that will be useful for us. Again, what the TAP is doing, their work is done. Their charge was to come up with some external recommendations that we will consider along with the community's ideas and feedback as well, in order to inform the development of our recommendations, which is quite some time off, quite some time away, because we still are going to be working on this plan through the rest of this year and into next year. But just wanted to share that we are hearing, particularly what you were just sharing, that's very, very valuable for us. And anyone else who had similar questions, we're definitely making note as well.
I found it a bit offensive that the example of a large house wasn't really meant to be a single-family house and didn't actually replace any other house. And I really think that was really poor research. There was no house there, and like I said, it has 8 bedrooms. It's not like it's like a 8,000 square foot 4-bedroom house that's only going to house like 3 people.
Yeah,
It's-
and
it's a house that's-
I think it's really helpful and important that you're bringing up this point, because this actually perfectly illustrates the point that we're trying to make about the feasibility of missing middle housing, which is that so this house is actually an 8-plex, and that is something that's feasible to put on, that's market feasible to put on a lot in this area, and that lower levels of density might not be market feasible. So I really appreciate you raising that point. It's
Well,
really good
there's
intel.
Lower levels of housing in Kent Mill, like smaller is also very feasible. Like we can't keep houses on the market for more than a couple
Excuse
days.
me.
I also do want to say one more thing. The study, the bike lane study, found average of 40 bikes a day, and that included, like a lot of people recorded, bicyclists just going around hitting the sensors, like going around the sensors over and over again to record multiple bicycling. And if you look at the surveys versus the number of people on the roads, more people said they took bikes daily, like answered surveys saying they took bikes daily, yet not living anywhere near the study area, than actually were on the road daily.
Okay.
So there's a lot of issues with that study.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I know that we're at the end of the period that was advertised for this session. We're fine with going further. But would like to go ahead and see if there are any additional questions. Please.
First, I want to thank you all for your hard work. I know you did so much in such a short period of time, and this is really impressive. I had one question about the development recommendations. If I'm remembering correctly, there was one about an impact tax waiver. The county currently has impact tax waivers for affordable housing, so I'm kind of wondering what this would look like if you've given any thought. Would it be like for densification? Would it be tied to FAR, construction type, or what would that look like?
Lisa, I was worried you were going to ask a question because you're the guru that I would look to for the answer. So that said, yes, there is an impact fee waiver in Montgomery County for affordable housing, which is intended to incentivize that sort of construction, because between a transportation and an education-related impact fee, putting in a new home could cost upwards of $40,000 to $50,000, depending where you're located in the county, in round figures. The idea here was, if you want to also incentivize densification of areas that are completely built out like this, per Tracy's comments, the economics don't work. And this would be one material way that the county, without actually having to write a check, could move the needle on those economics to try to incentivize some of this development.
Yeah, I believe the fellow in the back row with the baseball cap, is that a Steelers baseball cap? I just want to see if I can still see.
Hi, I'm Ken Horowitz, also from Kent Mill, and I have pretty much the same concerns as this lady also. I'm on a listserv with hundreds of members, and the vast majority of them have not even heard about any of these meetings. There's a Kent Mill Civic Association. I don't think they've heard about these meetings. So number one, I don't think we're getting communication like you said we should. Secondly, the vast majority of the people that I speak to in my neighborhood are extremely opposed to the bike lanes. Again, most of them have driven back and forth on University Boulevard. I've never seen bikes during that project. And finally, there are dangers that we can see. The Arcola onto University Boulevard, losing that right lane was horrible. And coming out of Sligo Creek, if you want to make a right turn onto University Boulevard, with those bike lanes there, it made it much more difficult to make a quick right turn. Also, I think that, I was going to mention the Kent Mill Shopping Center, but you've already done that. Thank you. But basically, I think it's mainly a matter of communication. I don't think any of us have really seen the results of the survey either, and we don't know how to get to it. So I think mainly it's a question of communication, but also the fact that I think most of the people that are against it are not hearing, we're not hearing their voices.
Okay, on the process side of this, and specifically speaking to the TAP. So technical assistance panel, you pull together a group of experts to come in and address the specific questions. It's not really intended, I mean, and we started out by meeting with a group of stakeholders yesterday from a variety of different groups, neighborhood groups and whatnot. So, but this isn't typically a process where it's obviously it's open to the public, but it's not intended to be a definitive planning study. It's intended to be something where ideas are generated that are then discussed with the community. And that's going to be the next follow-on bit. And some of the folks, Tanya from Montgomery County, may want to have additional comments to that, but that's where this goes. This isn't intended to be a really drawn-out process. We've been here for a day and a half. So
if I could add to that, I'm Carrie Sanders, I'm with the Planning Department, and I really appreciate the comment. I want to make sure that you and I connect, as well as the previous speakers, so that we can make sure to get your information and make sure you get added to the e-letter for the project. The project is in the most early stage. We haven't really done anything yet on this project, as Robert alluded to. We are at the early stage, and we view this exercise as an opportunity to get from the volunteers some advice as we start to work on the project. So your comments are very valuable to us, and we will make sure to make sure you have the information going forward. And our goal in this process is to make sure as many people as possible are involved and we hear all voices. So thank you so much for both sharing your comments. And I wanted to actually turn it, because I see there's a gentleman here who would like to speak. So,
I did want to address just two of the points, just so, because it's been brought up by two different people. So the right turn issue, your concerns are loudly, heard. I understand that. The SHA pilot program was a smaller section of road. It was meant to be an interim improvement. I know it was then announced, I believe, to be permanent, but then they pulled that back, and they did take it down. So I think the concerns were recognized that better treatment was needed to address those concerns. And there are lots of different ways to treat right turns. Right turns do happen to be one of the most dangerous things for bike lanes. People turning right, if they're not controlled by a traffic signal, can be very dangerous for protected bike lanes. But there are ways to deal with that. And as part of a larger project, and especially the longer term solutions that we're talking about, there are numerous ways to accommodate both right turns and bike lanes. So I don't want you to have the vision that we can't, if we have bike lanes, you won't have a right turn, because that's not necessarily true. There are ways to deal with that through the design process. The second part on ridership and not seeing bikes in lanes, I understand that too. I bike a lot. I don't always see a lot of people out when I'm out either. Bike lanes are in large part a long-term plan. You can't just put in one section of bike lane and expect to see it filled with cyclists the next day or the next year. You have to build out a complete network of bike lanes so that people can reliably know that if I want to go from here to 5 miles away, I'm not going to have to spend 2 miles of that in the middle on a 6-lane, arterial with no bike lanes. So as you build that network out, the goal is to start increasing bike ridership. There's a second part to that, the sidewalks. So even when people are not in the bike lanes, the bike lane provides the buffer between the sidewalks and traffic. So there are numerous fatalities throughout the county that occur within a few feet of the curb, from a bike crashing off the sidewalk or somebody falling off the sidewalk. So buffers between pedestrians and cars is the additional piece. So while there might not be a bike in there, it is a buffer nonetheless. So.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. You guys can fight it out which one gets to answer the question first.
Hi, I'm Kim Prasad. I'm with Epic of MoCo, and I don't have so much of a question, but a true concern that I want to get out front, and that's the streetscapes and pedestrian safety. And the answer that the State Highway Administration has come up with for Wheaton has been the fences, which they're racist, and they're only in areas where there's a large concentration of Latinos and Blacks. And I have a problem with that. And I'm just asking from the get-go that this not be an option for our streetscapes. So something beautiful. There's always different things that can be done to prevent people, discourage people from crossing in mid-street. I hope that's taken into consideration when things are being done. And I just want to get that on the record up front that fences is just not acceptable for Wheaton. No more fences here.
Thank you. Had one more question.
Hi, yeah. My name is Chris with Councilmember Kristen Mink's staff, and I had a question for planning staff. Now that this plan is going to be in your court, what exactly will be the timeline for future public engagement? What will those opportunities look like, and how can we make sure that we're helping share that information with folks in Four Corners and Woodmore in our district?
I will start it off and then pass it over to Carrie Sanders. So we actually kicked off public engagement in November when we launched the project. We held an in-person community meeting and a virtual community meeting. And as Carrie noted, we are still in the very early stages of this plan. So there are definitely many more opportunities for us to continue to meet with residents and other stakeholders in that corridor, not just meetings that we host, but we're very happy to come out to communities, to different organizations and to talk with folks. So I'll turn it over to Carrie just to give a bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I also wanted to recognize Councilmember Mink, who's in the audience. Thanks so much for coming today. And I also want to introduce our project manager for this project, Nkosi Yearwood, who's working closely to develop that schedule that we just alluded to with Tanya, and also would be a great resource. He is on our webpage as well. His contact information is there. So if you have questions about the project, or you want to know more about the time frame, or you want to have Nkosi, Zubin Adrianvala is also in the audience. He's the deputy project manager for the project. And Nkosi and Zubin have actually been going, whenever requested, 2 different meetings throughout the community over the last month or two. As we are in the earliest stages, we were encouraged to see over 150 participants at the first 2 kickoff meetings that we had. So we really look forward to engaging with the community. We want this to be a really inclusive process, and we ask that you work with us to give us your feedback. So in terms of the timing, Nkosi, did you want to go over some of the timing of the project in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so briefly. So briefly, we'll be back out in the public the first week in March. We wanted to get the TAP done. We have another meeting coming up with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, requested our presence. So those things will happen, and then we'll be back out the first week in March. Sort of a follow-up from that first meeting, we've done some more additional work on the right-of-way, concerns of property impacts and things like that. So we'll be coming out to the public with that information, as well as broadly highlighting some of the work from the TAP process. And then we'll continue with additional public meetings the rest of the year. So.
And with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming here today. May the process be with you as you go forward. I think, there's a lot, we all agree, there's a lot of potential in University Boulevard. It's a good place now. It could be a wonderful place going, in a few years. So good luck, good hunting, and look forward to coming back in, okay, one more question. But this is a great wind-up.
Okay. Started.
All right, my name's Chip Pye. I live here in Wheaton. I go to a lot of these meetings, and for just one quick question, show of hands, how many of you here live in this area? Okay, cool. Okay, I don't see the people that engage in our community regularly here. I see some faces I see, but I don't, and that's interesting. But here's the main bug I got from this, Dr. Lowe. You said that people move out of their houses after 20 years, that the average in this area is, and that That was your one
No,
of your.
just a guess. I don't actually have the figure.
Okay. I want to just simply touch on that because I've lived in my house 25 years. Okay, my house is 70 years old. I just put a new roof.
My guess is incredible.
All right. Oh, but while I've sat in my house, okay, when I moved in, I was a young person there. Your guess isn't incredible because my neighborhood, and I walk my dog in my neighborhood. I'm involved in politics. I talk to my neighbors regularly about development and stuff like that. My neighborhood and most of these areas around here is post-World War II housing stock, okay? The homes are 70 years old, but they're not falling down. What happens in this neighborhood, this is a starter neighborhood for starter homes. Couples move in, they get a dog, they have 2.7 kids, okay? And then all of a sudden, 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, right about the time the kids hit the teen years, isn't the right, no longer works for them. They take the equity in their homes and they move on. But this neighborhood is the first peg on the ladder for home ownership, okay? So moving forward, if you move forward with the idea that everybody has lived here 20 years, I'm the oddball on that, okay? That would be wrong to do in considering that. And one of the things that I just want to throw out here as we move into all this high density and we want to incentivize people to tear down their single family homes, you're going to be replacing them with renters, okay, who aren't, and you're going to be taking away the opportunity for people to buy homes, gain equity, and climb the ladder. Basically, if you remember the movie, the Christmas movie, you're taking all of a sudden areas where people have home ownership, okay, and can move on with that away and making Potterville. You know Potterville? Yep. Because yeah, these neighborhoods serve people in getting them into their first experience of home ownership. And turning them all into rentals is, I think we need to look at what's going to happen in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. I don't think there's anything about missing middle housing that favors renters. I think we're talking about for sale housing. Oh, no, it's 4 condos. It's a tiny little homeowners association.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that comment. And if I may, we're a little over time. It's been a wonderful discussion. And it demonstrates to me a variety of different opinions, a variety of different thought leadership. And what I thought I would do is bring it to a close by just reflecting a little bit what I've heard and also reiterating our purpose today. So I'm actually not sure if I did introduce myself in the beginning, but my name is Deb Kirsten-Billick. I'm the Executive Director at ULI Washington. Our mission as a member-driven nonprofit organization is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities around the world. We're a global organization, and here in Metropolitan Washington, we have a mandate to endure that mission and achieve that mission locally. And so one of the ways we do that is through this program, the Technical Assistance Program. I want to thank Montgomery County for inviting us here because it demonstrates to me a real desire to probe this corridor in a meaningful way by bringing in thought leadership who have no vested interest in this community. That's actually quite intentional. This program is designed so that every single member of this panel who's volunteering their time is here because they want to be here, because they've been honored to be asked to take their time away and apply thought leadership to this series of challenges, and because they have no vested or professional interest or any sort of concern in that regard to the study area. So I wanted to mention that because that's a key part of the way we bring recommendations. We're bringing market-driven recommendations that are solely that. What this opens the door to do is allow the county to take these recommendations as part of the wide variety of other inputs that are required into forming a plan, right? So this is a first step, one of many. And so I know the county as a resident to be one that really values community engagement. Thank you for being so gracious to the comments today. Thank you very much to the panelists for sharing the past 2 days with us, for accepting some of the comments that came our way based on our recommendations. And I also want to thank Emily McKnight, who needs to give a wave, and also Elizabeth Road in the back, who needs to give a wave. These are the staff support. ULI Washington is a lean staff of 6 individuals who work to deliver programming all over the region. And so these individuals were really responsible for shepherding this scope to today's recommendations. So before I close, let me ask Tanya, is there anything else you would like to say? I'd love for you to have the last word and also to thank you.
Sure. Just want to, again, first thank the TAP for their time and bringing their expertise and thought leadership, as Deb mentioned. But also just particularly want to thank the residents who have come today, taken out some time in the middle of the day to come hear these recommendations. And again, you know, everything that you have brought up in terms of concerns and ideas, we, the planning department, our staff, we're the ones who are doing the master plan. We are hearing this feedback as well. We will also be following up with some of our partner agencies such as MCDOT and SHA to share with them what we've heard, particularly in terms of the transportation concerns. But mainly just wanted to thank you for coming and hope that you will continue, actually I'm certain you will continue to be engaged in this project, and hope to look forward to seeing you at some additional community meetings. So thank you.